Welcome to the Running Educator Podcast. This is episode 27, The History of Treefort Music Festival. I'm your host, Mike Cummings. My guest today is Eric Gilbert, the co-founder of Treefort, and he explains his journey that led to the creation of this amazing music festival in Boise, Idaho. Here's a little history. Treefort is a 5-day music and art festival that brings hundreds of emerging and independent artists from across the world to downtown Boise, Idaho. The first festival was 2012 as an extension of the current momentum in the Boise music and art scene at large. Its vision is that Treefort will provide the opportunity for Boise to play a host to a national and regional music scenes while showcasing the local and upcoming talent. Treefort was the first music festival to become a B Corporated certified in 2016 and was proudly recognized as a cultural ambassador for the city of Boise in 2015 through 2017. In 2020, Treefort became the first fan-owned festival. This is the Running Educator Podcast.
Cool. Yeah. So my name's Eric Gilbert. I'm one of the co-founders and the festival director for Treefort Music Fest. And, I grew up in West Boise here, but went to school up in Moscow. And then after that, my wife and I formed a band and with a good friend we met up there, and we just started living in a van, traveling the country that way for about, a couple of years. We paid rent in Haley, Idaho. And it was just a place for us to come home to in between. Our drummer had access to a small home there that we were able to squat in essentially in between tours. And so that was kind of, I ended up getting a music history and music theory degree. And, I pivoted out of the engineering track up in University of Idaho early on, just kind of decided to chase some passions outside of that. And so formed this band, and we were touring. We were signed to a label in Portland and just kind of exploring the country at a real ground level standpoint. And at one point decided to relocate back to Boise. My dad was going through some health issues, and also Haley was great, but also we just wanted a bigger community to be a part of when we were at home. And so landed here and just started getting involved with the Boise music scene and trying to resist the urge to move to Portland, especially that's where our label was based. So that was kind of like the gravitational pull at that time for a lot of people in the music community. It was either Portland or Seattle or LA or New York or anything. And so really started exploring, ways we can we started getting involved in the scene, helping build the scene. And then through some of those actions, there for a few years, we were on the road, and my band was called Finn Riggins, and we were, there was a couple years there, we were on the road 200 plus days out of the year. And, through that, we were doing very DIY style touring. So we were working with other bands in other towns and sleeping on their floors or couches. And, basically, so then when we decided to start touring a little bit less in 2011, there was our karma meter was a little out of whack. And we started returning a lot of favors we'd made all these friends in all these different places and that wanted to come check out Boise and check out Idaho because we told them how cool it was, even though most people at that time didn't know much about this area. Not taking any credit or fault for the fact that Boise is on the map now, but yes. And so
it was you.
Yeah, no, definitely not. But that was 10 years ago was a lot different, I feel like, as far as awareness of Boise and with both the good sides and the downsides to that. And so we just started trying to help out a bunch of friends we made to, stop in Boise, and they'd sleep at our house, and we'd take care of them. We were sort of returning the favor. And, I got more active in helping set up shows and helping bands. And then Radio Boise went on air, which I feel like was a really big pivot for the scene. There was the first time that in a long time, since the mid 80s, that there was independent radio here. So not only local bands could get more airplay, but also just underground bands in general. And so that was a big thing that happened in 2011. And then I met Lori Chandro and Drew Rona, who were kind of in a parallel universe as more like music fans looking to sort of, at that time, build a venue or just get involved in the music scene. Somehow they were seeing their own gaps. They wanted to see more touring acts that they liked to stop in Boise, and through some mutual friends and stuff, they got connected to me. And first it was hey, you want to, they didn't have any experience in the music scene, so they were looking for somebody that knew more to help them put on a couple shows. And my band at that point had played a lot of festivals, kind of like what Treefort has become, which is a multi-venue sort of showcase style urban festival. There was one in Portland called Music Fest Northwest that we played 4 years in a row that I think actually kind of ended in 2011, 2012. And then there was one in Denver called the Underground Music Showcase. CMJ, which was kind of college radio focused in New York City, we played in 2008, actually. We played South by Southwest in 2010. And we're, other than Rosalie Sorrell's the only Idaho band there. So we were sort of like, hey, we just got to get some more action going. So anyways, we really, as a band, we really liked that style of festival because it was the one opportunity where a lot of our touring friends were all in the same spot. And it was also just a cool, and it was a lot of smaller bands, and it was a lot of fun as an artist. And also it was a cool way to see a city, and so it had been kind of percolating that it'd be cool for something like that to happen in Boise, and just recognize that the Boise market, could use more exposure to the local bands we're here, but also more exposure to just unknown bands, bands people hadn't heard of, but were great, and so, trying to figure out ways to do that. So when I met Drew and Lori, it was like, yeah, you want to help us a couple of shows? And I was like, yeah, I'm always down. That sounds cool. And then sort of countered with hey, this idea of this multi-venue, multi-day festival in town. What if we tried to do that with what you guys are interested in doing? And, I pitched it real small, 3 days, something like 60 some bands. And, and I know, right? Yeah. They got back and we're like, yeah, let's give it a shot. Show us what we need to do and let's start working on it together. And so that was basically October of 2011 is when we started putting the effort in. And we already, we're on the name and everything. We had already kind of mutually been through a few different angles working with James Lloyd, the illustrator. And so we kind of knew the art design that we were going for. And pretty soon after the initial impetus, Megan Stahl, who's one of the co-founders too, she was just at a lot of shows, and I had met her and she was currently out of a job. So sort of hey, we're trying to start this thing. And she had a lot of marketing and experience. She used to work for the Idaho Business Review at the time and stuff. So she was the other one that kind of came in and kind of filled out our initial core team and just started working on building. And so the name kind of came from, in all honesty, I grew up with a tree fort in my backyard. And as we were brainstorming kind of playful names and also fit in our style, but also I think it really embodied this sort of spirit, trying to build the world that we want to live in as adults, that is in reality pretty similar to the world we grew up in as kids, that's fun and exciting. And so it's sort of, once I sort of presented that, just because I went and visited my mom and dad and I saw the fort, I was like, hey, what about tree fort? And it stuck right away. It was just one of those naming moments where oh, that's totally it, and so I take credit for introducing it, but that's about it. It just sort of manifested itself. But yeah, and so it was, like I said, it was supposed to be 3 days and 60 bands. By the time, in 6 months' time, we scrambled to put together what we were working on, and I had enough experience with it, and we brought in a few other people locally, mostly that had some general experience, but mostly just excitement and passion around it, and that's kind of what the whole thing's been built on. And there was enough community excitement when we sort of just announced the concept and announced some of the initial bands and then there was a lot of excitement because we purposely timed it the week after South by Southwest because I was familiar enough with the touring traffic around there that I knew there was a lot of bands that would need a place out west. There's only so many places people can play out west, and so there's a high volume of supply and bands that time of year. So really, it was a great way to help out the touring circuit too. Hey, we'll give you a cool stop in Boise and help introduce Boise to your music. And so by that first year, it already grew to I think we're at 140 bands in 4 days. It expanded already. And in that first 6 months of just trying to put it together. And then obviously today, or the last time it happened, 2019, it was 5 days, 500 bands, 9 or 10 official other forts of different, for those that aren't familiar, there's all these other. So really Tree Fort was built from this perspective of, sort of by artists for artists. So really me representing that most directly in the music side of what would artists want to see out of the festival? What's the most productive thing for them to reach the audiences they want to reach, but also the experience that they want to have. So then over time, we had different people in different veins of the community here reach out, from the literary community, hey, what if we applied the same concept, but with Story Fort, called it Story Fort, and then Yoga Fort happened, and then Hack Fort in collaboration with the local tech scene, Skate Fort for the skateboarding community, Kid Fort, Food Fort, Ale Fort. Actually, Ale Fort was the first fort because it happened the first year with us, and it also it was the natural pairing, right? So that's kind of the impetus. And then, really, like, I think one of the strengths of it all along has been that to be frank, we didn't know what we were doing, in the sense that we didn't know. We just were like, we wanted to create this thing. We wanted to like help build the music scene, and there wasn't like a prescriptive end goal other than that. And so we've been really open-minded to collaborators, and, very embodied that sort of spirit of collaboration in how we worked with the community at large and other creative outlets, and really have through that, I guess, open-mindedness, but also like having a real strong core team that was helped lead and guide through that we've, kind of created this dynamic force of intersectionalism in a lot of ways, of just like all these different veins in the community coming together to build this thing, in the way that it exists now. And it's constantly evolving. So
yeah, it's pretty cool how this thing has really taken off. I remember the first time going to Tree Fort and just like completely blown away. But I do want to say, from a Tree Fort goer perspective, like, it was so amazing to feel the culture and the community of Boise just kind of come alive, and to see a performance in the Cathedral Rockies, or, just places you just never would have thought of. And I was just like, that is so brilliant. And I think that's the one thing I absolutely loved with this. And like, just touching up on the land itself, giving back to the Shoshone Indians. And I mean, that to me was more like, that's where it really became spiritual, and really just how you guys always come back to the 3 R's, and really just giving it back to the kids. You talked in the get-go about being kid-like, and that's just what I really felt like, just totally alive, totally free. And then just hearing epic music wherever you went. It did not matter where you played or where you were at. It was just an amazing vibe and feeling and in Boise. And I thank you for that graciously. So, and I also love how, you're giving back to the LGBTQ, community and Drag Fort, and then obviously making up a Comedy Fort.
And now a word from our sponsor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so you can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's the easiest way to make a podcast, all in one place. Download for free the Anchor app, or go to anchor.fm to get started. That is ANCHOR.FM. Enjoy. And now, back to the show.
Those are just some of the things I was really looking forward to this year. And, obviously we got kind of bumped out, but, September 22nd, you guys are on for the show, correct?
That's right.
So,
yeah. And when that happens this fall, it's going to be 2.5 years since the last Tree Fort, which has been a really kind of wild ride and weird and crazy to think about. It's a lot of, it's a lot of time in us adults' years, but I always think it in the context of like someone in high school. We were, that's a big difference. Your freshman year to your junior year, or worse, or better, your junior year to when you're now no longer live in Boise because you went off to college. So,
yeah.
So it's a lot of time.
And that was the thing I was going to ask you, like, what changes, obviously the pandemic affected everybody. Has changes made anything good? Has made anything bad? I mean, what have you guys taken away? And I know, like you said, with that creativeness that you guys have, I was like, there's just, these guys are going to make something and just going to knock it out of the park regardless of whatever they're going to do. And I know safety is a big factor. And so those are kind of the follow-up questions. Are you going to have other states that are still in the red? Or, I mean, I don't know, just what's your guys' overall protocol going into this?
I'll say one of the biggest challenges with the pandemic, I think, for folks like us is like, we're sort of used to like having a perspective of anything is possible, and we can build it if we put enough effort, and we'll just hustle it out, right? The pandemic has been real confronting in the fact that there's a lot we can't control, and that's usually true, but this has been profoundly true this last year. It's like, so we've really been taking the perspective of waiting it out for the most part, like the real Treefort experience, that one of the things that makes it magical is all the human connection that happens. And that's, like being close with people, breaking bread, high-fiving, hugging, it's like, so with that said, like, I think one of the silver linings, I mean, it's been a really challenging year, obviously, especially since we had to cancel or postpone so closely to when it was going to happen. We had a lot of sunk expenses, and so, financially it's been a very challenging year. And I want to just say it's been thankful for being a real community driven and community supported festival, because there's a lot of folks that have come out of the woodwork to help make sure we make it to the other side. And I'm thankful for that. And so we've taken the opportunity, after, we've, this coming festival, when it does happen, will be our 9th one. So we were 8 festivals in, and like any, like, I guess, small business, a lot of the first 8 years was just like sheer willpower and momentum. But at some point, I think we'd had, it was also, there was a little bit of like, and I don't want to there's not too much hyperbole to this, but, we were growing pretty fast, and there was a lot of positive energy, which is good, but that's also, it can be hard to keep the wheels on too. It's like the classic, like, train on the train tracks going a little too fast. And so we were managing it, but I think what the great pause has done for us is given us the opportunity to sort of rebuild the systems behind the scenes a little bit in a way that'll build better resilience and sustainability to the whole entity. Because, like I said, when we started it, we didn't have a long-term vision for it. But once it got going, we're like, oh, wow, this is important. This is amazing. How can we make sure this thing survives well into the future, even beyond some of us, right? So, we were just starting to grapple with some of that stuff and struggling a little bit because we were so busy with keeping it going. But the great pause has allowed us to sort of reset a little bit. So with that in mind, now we're looking at, especially things are starting to look a little positive. Our perspective on this coming September is there's still a lot of unknowns, but our perspective is we intend to do something that, we feel like we've earned the right to try to do a festival that represents us, but also is safe for everyone. It's a year and a half since the festival would have happened last March. And we're trying not to get too far ahead of ourselves. Most of the bands are still signed up. A lot of the talent is still there, but we don't want to restructure until we have a little bit better sense of what it can look and feel like. We generally assume there's going to be some limitations on capacity, and we're going to have to like manage that accordingly. But it's a little hard to hit that moving target even 6 months out now. And I think we've all sort of learned not to predict the future around COVID too much, right? So, yes. So our general operating mindset right now is optimism. We're rebuilding the team. We're excited about new systems, prepared to have a scaled down festival, if that's what it means. Plus, I think there's just going to be a lot of things happening this year, and I hope that's the case. There's going to, we're usually in March where we're filling a gap there's not usually a lot of things happening. I think there's going to be a lot of things this fall if things are going well, which is awesome. We're all hungry for the event, so we're going to be a little less like filling a gap and more part of a litany of fun things to do for us all here in Boise this fall. And so I think our festival, which typically has a lot of people from out of state, like 30% of our pass holders come from outside of Idaho, and talent from all over the world, like international talent. And so most likely most of the international talent's probably not going to be able to make it this year, just based on the international travel being pretty challenging. And then there'll probably be a little less national talent and might be a little more local and regional. But we also think the pent up demand for local talent is exciting for local talent. And so I think the pent up demand right now is just for us all to be able to get out of our homes, right, and go and see each other. So yeah, that's kind of our mindset. Other than that, I don't have a lot of specifics because we are still kind of in the semi waiting to fine tune it, until we know more.
Well, I was praying to God that there wasn't going to be like a Zoom for it, because I didn't know if there was going to be like bands playing on the Zoom, and I mean that would be a cool idea, and I know people, especially for those international folks, it would be a good thing to have, just to kind of get that music sold out and be a part of it. But I was just thinking they'll come up with something creative, because that's just the creative geniuses that they are. So, and you did bring fear to my heart when you were talking about how awesome you guys were getting, and I was like, oh man, they're going to sell out, and then some other group is going to come in and just absolutely ruin it. And like I said, I can't. If you've never been to Tree Fort, you just need to experience it, because I remember I just went one night with a friend, and I just took in the vibes, and it's just a happening place to be. And I'm so grateful that it is in Boise, Idaho, and I'm hoping that we become like a second Nashville or something like that, because like you said, the talent is just absolutely amazing. The forts are, for everybody, is something to see. And that was just my little fear that, oh man, he's gonna exit left. But that day might come. But like I said, like you said, I hope that this will continue on. I hope your kids or our kids or whoever else picks up the pieces and make it, good for the next generation. But
Mike, I do want to just speak to that briefly too. I mean, we really, because of the way this festival has been built, which is by a lot of community volunteerism and support in general, is like, we really do take very seriously honoring the fact that this is a festival for the community, by the community. And so, with that notion is like, yeah, like a lot of festivals often, that's the exit plan. A lot of businesses are like that too. The exit plan is to eventually sell it when it's humming, right? So, but our goal is like longevity for the community spirit of the festival. And so that's one reason why, though, if you're not familiar with it, we did this equity crowdfunding approach this year, which was using this platform called WeFunder, which was, instead of, because we needed some financial help, but there were some offers out on the table of like, yeah, it's like, that's when someone swoops in, is like, oh, you're in trouble here, we'll buy you out or do something like that. But for us, we're like, no, that can't be the path forward here. So we really essentially put shares available to the community, and so in lieu of raising a lot of money from an individual or an entity, it was like, hey, if you're interested in the community, if this festival staying a community driven and essentially owned festival, become a community owner. And it's been really cool, the people that have come out of the woodwork to ensure that. And so yeah, that's a big reason why we did that approach, was to your very point there, is there's been a lot of storied festivals that eventually sold to some, community driven festivals that is essentially eventually sold to somebody that really just altered the experience completely, and it no longer belonged to the community, and it was obvious. So
yeah, well, like I said, the creativeness of the whole thing is just absolutely genius, and the authenticness of the bands and just everything that goes into it, it's just amazing. So going into the last question, what as Tree Fort is coming up, as you said, in 6 months, what are some logistical things? What are some things that we can get out to your Tree Fort goers, and how to better prepare themselves, like mask and all this kind of stuff, so that way it's not like we didn't tell you.
Yeah. I think it's probably too early for us to have too much definition around that. I think the biggest thing is to like know that it's probably going to change in the next several months, like what shape it can be in. And if things are going well, like we hope it's experienced as normal as possible. But we do recognize it, and I think that would go for a lot of us. Like if it being able to happen means we need people to wear masks, and to be honest with you, wear masks not even just during the festival, but until then, like, just keep the spread under control. Like I hope people recognize the long-term benefit for all of us to be able to reopen our businesses and do our things, if we can all just kind of follow some modifications to what we consider normal until we fully can, so I think until we have more information on that front, I don't have a lot for you to share necessarily, other than like, go to treefortmusicfest.com. We will continue to update that, and through our socials are pretty active. We'll make sure to be pretty communicative about what the experience is going to look and feel like as we know more. So,
yeah. Well, Mr. Eric Gilbert, you are amazing, and it's good to catch up with you. Thanks for joining me on the Running Educator podcast. And man, it's just good to see you. Hope everything's well and your family's doing well. And thanks for coming on. So,
thank you.